So in our research, we interviewed 13 women who had attended a festival in the UK in the last few years, and we asked them about their experiences of attending festivals, how safe they felt, if they felt unsafe, why they felt unsafe, where they felt unsafe, and what those experiences were like. The women that we spoke to told us that sexual harassment and violence is a routine part of attending music festivals in their experience in the UK. It was a normal part of attending a festival, much like attending other leisure spaces, and actually a lot of them drew parallels and similarities actually with the experiences of attending bars and nightclubs in other spaces. And we know that sexual violence happens everywhere, public places, private spaces, leisure spaces, and actually our research shows they happen at festivals as well. And that this was, as I say, a part and parcel, normal part actually of attending music festivals. So women in our study had experienced a range of different behaviours on a sort of continuum of sexual violence really. So at one end was the everyday unwanted comments, the catcalling, the wolf whistling. Some of those comments would be quite aggressive and could be very intimidating. And then there was the sort of physical assaults that people told us about as well. Being followed back to their tent was really quite common, being groped in a crowd, being rubbed up against in a crowd and not knowing who had done it. And to such an extent this was normal that some of them described having these kind of experiences on public transport, and actually I probably had this experience on the way to the festival, and then I have it when I get to the festival as well. So a full kind of range of experience really, from those kind of verbal intrusions all the way through to the very sort of legally serious rapes and sexual assault. So we already know that women engage in a whole range of different tactics and strategies to try and manage the risk of occupying male spaces. And lots of colleagues have looked at this kind of safety work, as it's called, that women have to do day to day in order to try and reduce the chances of sexual violence happening. Festivals are no different, so women use a lot of the same tactics and strategies that they use in other spaces. They might avoid going to them, and some women certainly told us that they actually didn't go to festivals anymore, or didn't go to specific festivals where they felt that there was more of a chance of this happening. But actually, those that did go to festivals still weren't really free to enjoy the festival in the same way that lots of men will be. So they may change their clothing, for example. They don't wear what they would ideally like to wear because they don't feel it's safe. They aren't prepared to be on their own, so they're always making sure that they're sticking in groups. That means sometimes even practical things like going to the toilet, no one feels they can do that. They have to go with a group because they almost need a sort of a chaperone. And some women told us about needing a male chaperone actually, that they would only go to a festival with male friends or partners because they felt that they were more safe than if they were on their own or with girlfriends. Other things included limiting their alcohol or not drinking at all, paying to stay in a different part of the festival where it seemed to be more safe, so at VIP camping areas, for example, where they felt that there might be more presence of security. Lots of different things that women do that ultimately change the experience of a festival, because they are not free to just enjoy it in the way that we want them to. It's important to note that sexual violence happens everywhere, and it is not an issue that is limited just to festivals, and there's nothing that festivals in and of themselves are doing to cause sexual violence. Of course, sexual violence is ultimately the responsibility of the person who is perpetrating it. Having said that, we know that there are various different cultural and social and spatial features in different parts of society that can contribute to sexual violence occurring in those spaces. And at festivals, there are some unique features of festivals that we think may create these conducive environments for sexual violence to be perpetrated. So, for example, in terms of their physical layout, a lot of the festivals, certainly the big major commercial festivals in the UK, are held on very large sites. They have tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people coming together. And often those people come together to see these main acts in a crowded sort of stage area, or sometimes a big tent. And so that creates a critical mass of people in a particular area that makes it very difficult in terms of monitoring those people because of the sheer number of them, but also in terms of detecting sexual violence and responding to it when it happens. So, you know, for example, women told us that it's like drive-by misogyny. Men can call you out, they can say something, they can grope you, they can rub up against you, and actually in a crowded area, and actually by the time you've turned around, who was it? It's very difficult for you to identify who it was. And even if you can, is there any way of you really being able to get out of that crowd and get some help from somebody who can then identify that same person, do something about it? So the crowds is one example. Another is the camping areas. So often with the big festivals, they will have overnight camping, and those are located some distance away from the festival, often with minimal security and involving a fairly long walk, often in the dark, from the festival site, sometimes poorly lit, to the camping site. Again, potentially ideal environments for somebody who is looking to perpetrate sexual violence and abuse. Culturally, there are again many features, but one in particular is this idea that people attend festivals because they are spaces where the normal rules of life don't apply. You know, you're there to have fun, you're there to let your hair down, to relax, to ignore the kind of normal day-to-day stresses and rules that come with everyday life in normal society. But because they are these spaces where it's seen as sort of like, you know, no rules don't apply, or the same rules don't apply, there is then this kind of expectation for women that actually that means that even though sexual violence happens everywhere, at festivals in particular, it may be more likely to happen because people are not do not see festivals as somewhere where they have to kind of be following the same rules that they would have to in normal society, and that's not helped by the fact that actually at festivals we don't have the presence very often of the sort of law enforcement and public bodies that are there to protect people, like the police. You know, they're just not there at festivals. So again, it kind of helps with this idea that normal rules don't apply and no one's there to enforce them. So we've seen in the last few years that music festivals have become really aware of this issue, and there seems to be a real appetite for doing something about it, which is great. There's already been various initiatives, campaigns. Festivals are kind of trying to work with specialist grassroots organisations to raise awareness and to really try and move towards a sort of zero tolerance environment, and all of that is great. For us, we think though that now's the opportunity to gather a bit of momentum around this and actually see festivals come together to look at this issue in a consistent way. Because at the moment it's fairly fragmented, people are doing their own thing, and there's not a great deal of evidence on whether any of these things will actually work. What we can't do is take for granted that things that do work in other spaces can just be brought over to a festival space and will work. And so we think one of the really exciting things about festivals is that they are not restricted in the same way that other spaces are in the sort of physical built environment. So other leisure spaces cannot simply redesign themselves from year to year because of the various restrictions in place by being in a physical building. The great thing about most festivals is actually that they're in open spaces where they can reimagine the design of that space from day to day if they wanted to actually, but certainly year to year. And so one of the things that we would like to see is whether or not there are opportunities to reimagine those spaces, not only in terms of their kind of physical layout, but actually how in doing that you might have an impact on some of these cultural features of festivals as well, and therefore sort of change the atmosphere of the festival so that it is much more difficult to perpetrate sexual violence, and actually if it does happen, it's much easier to detect it and respond.